Allison Levine, founder and CEO of the Local Journalism Initiative, is an accomplished journalist from Delaware, known for her insightful community reporting. Allison. Dawes. Dawes is the executive director of The City, a non-profit news organization in New York. Morgan Malone, a dedicated to public interest investigative journalism. And Martin Carcasson, a communication studies professor and founder of the Center for Public Deliberation at Colorado State University, specializes in deliberative democracy and collaborative decision-making. A leading voice, Martin, in fostering informed and inclusive civic participation. Thank you all for being here with us today. And I will start with you, Allison, since you are playing at your home court. I want you to tell us what motivated you to start the local journalism initiative at the Delaware Spotlight and how and what you do. I think it's open.
Okay, yeah. Great. That's how I can't turn it on because it's already turned on. So, hi, yeah, I'm Allison. I'm happy to be here with all of you representing our beautiful city, as a couple of folks have called out. Wilmington is a great place to be, and there are a couple of things that I've always been passionate about through my whole life. I'm really most passionate about our democracy, our community, and journalism, frankly. And what I have observed over the past 15 to 20 years in Delaware and around the country and around the world really has been a little bit heartbreaking to see what has happened as the economy has changed with the rise of the internet. And I wanted to do something about it because obviously the models that we have right now are not working that great. I don't know that I have the answer or that there is an answer, but that's what made me want to start trying. We have to try some different models to build up our local news ecosystem and to shift the way that it serves people in Delaware and around the world. The media, it's no secret, the local media, I should say, is in a bit of disarray. And the situation that it's in now, even when it was good, it wasn't really serving all audiences well. So how can we sort of try to reshape it and look at some different possibilities? So that's what motivated me a couple of years ago to start the Local Journalism Initiative, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Delaware. And we are working to strengthen democracy and community by strengthening local journalism. In 2022, we conducted a statewide ecosystem assessment, an assessment of our local news and information ecosystem to try to get our arms around what's happening in Delaware, what's working for people, what's not working for people, what do people want and need, how can we do better? And that ecosystem assessment that was published in 2022 now informs all of the work that we are doing, and we continue to build on that research. The ecosystem assessment is informing our 3 current work streams. We have 3 major initiatives going on right now. One is an internship program that we originally formed in partnership with the Delaware Community Foundation. And that internship program works with local newsrooms to try to deepen the pipeline of Black and brown local news reporters and local news reporters from other underserved and underrepresented communities. We also run something called the Delaware Journalism Collaborative, which is a convening of 23 Delaware newsrooms, the state libraries, other community organizations. And that convening, that collaborative, is working on deep diving and leading, deep dive reporting and leading conversations about polarization in our communities and the issues that drive wedges between us and how we can work together more effectively. That collaborative spent the first 2 years really working on polarization, and this year, because of how polarizing elections can be, is focusing on voter education and information, to try to engage and inspire and inform more Delawareans to vote and participate in the local elections. Our most ambitious project launched just this year, and that's called Spotlight Delaware. Spotlight Delaware is a first of its kind, collaborative, community-powered nonprofit newsroom. And I want to shout out, I see some of my team here. I see Jake Owens, our editor-in-chief, David Stradley, our director of membership and community engagement. Thank you guys for being here. We have a couple of other team members. I don't think they're here. No? Okay, great. I want to make sure I don't miss folks. This is Delaware after all. You have to make sure you include everybody. So Spotlight Delaware just launched a couple of months ago, and we're a fast-growing newsroom. We are focused on the impact of public policy decisions and how they affect people's everyday lives. And we're particularly paying close attention to underserved and underrepresented communities that haven't always been included or served by local media well. We are seeking to inspire people to get involved in government, in elections, in voting, and in other ways. Civic engagement doesn't just have to mean voting, right? There are lots of ways, as we've heard over the last couple of days, to participate in our civil society. And that's particularly important when we're talking about folks who are not citizens, right? If you can't vote, that doesn't mean you can't participate. We still want people to participate. So we are working to inspire people to participate and then to equip them with the information they need to effectively drive the change that they want to see. And we're doing this through 4 key strategies. First, we are co-creating Spotlight Delaware with our communities. Right now, we are in the midst of a 12-session statewide community listening tour where we are talking with hundreds of Delawareans. We have already engaged about 400 people throughout the state, and we have several more sessions to go, where we're really trying to understand what people want and need and how we can best serve them, because we want to build this newsroom with and for our communities. Second strategy is that we're actually working to build up the whole local news ecosystem in Delaware. It's not enough to create a new nonprofit newsroom and say that that fixes the problem, right? We have gaps in our ecosystem. We have people who need access to local news and information, and you'll hear me say repeatedly local news and information, because it's not just news, right? People also need basic information. They need to know how to register their kids for kindergarten. They need to know when jobs are available. They need to know how to sign up for a small business loan. This is not necessarily news, but it is information that we need as communities. Our third strategy, we're working to meet people where they are. It's really hard to get people to change their media diets. I have no belief that we're going to get every Delawarean to come visit spotlightdelaware.org. We're trying to go where people already are. So that's why we're doing this through a series of partnerships with existing news organizations. So we're building partnerships with legacy media organizations throughout the state. We already have 5 local newspapers, legacy newspapers, and online news organizations signed on that actually republish our content. So those audiences are also getting the information that we're providing. And that also helps to strengthen those existing newsrooms by giving them more product against which they can sell advertising, sell subscriptions, sell sponsorships, et cetera. And then our fourth strategy, going where people are, I should say, we're also building a network of non-traditional information sources. When we go out into the community, not everybody reads a newspaper, listens to a news show, watches news on TV, or otherwise actually seeks out news in a traditional way. What people do, though, is they're on WhatsApp, or they read their church newsletter, or they see flyers on the bulletin board at the Y. So we're working to find out who the information sources are, who are those trusted ambassadors in the community, and we're partnering with them to get information out to communities in different ways. And finally, in this strategy, we're also working toward providing information in different languages, because if we truly want to include more communities in a meaningful way, we need to go to them where they are in the languages that they speak most comfortably. And our fourth strategy is that we're working to build agency in people. When we are writing stories about public policy, you know, a bunch of us in this room are policy and journalism nerds, right? We get excited about this stuff. Most people don't. So we are working, when we write almost every story, we have a box at the top that says, why should you care about this? Why should Delawareans care about this story, about what's happening at the Port of Wilmington? And why should you read this 1,500-word wonky story? Let us tell you at the top. Somewhere in that story, we're also going to tell you, what can you do about it? We've had a story this week about a law that's being considered that would require both University of Delaware and Delaware State University to provide access to abortion pills through student health care. We're not saying what you should think about that. We're providing the information, and there's a button in the middle of the story that tells you how to contact the legislator who's driving that issue. So that's how we're working to build agency. So that is where we are right now.
I don't know about you, but to me it sounds that you've done a lot in a very short period of time.
Thanks. I have a great team behind me.
Nick, the city is a medium that is continuously in discussion with the communities. Could you share with us some information on how you managed to do that? And if you want to refer to a project that was completed with the communities and the impact it had.
Sure. You know, maybe I'll pull back for a quick second first before I start talking about a concrete example, because I think everyone, certainly the three of us who are working in some of these newer news organizations, we kind of represent part of an emerging movement. And you're going to hear a lot of common themes between us about the way we approach things. I know not everyone in the room or online is a journalism person, so I just want to situate some context quickly before I talk about why, in New York City of all places, we need to have a nonprofit news organization that centers community in its investigative journalism and in its service journalism. Journalism people invented the future of news about 20 years ago. So we've had about 20 years of the future. And a lot of the future of news conversation was a response to the technology shock of the 90s and the early 2000s. The technology shock, the audience shock, the trust shock, and most importantly, the revenue shock, right? And the way that we've dealt with that is to kind of adopt a lot of the thinking and the processes and even maybe the ideologies of technology. Come up with an innovative solution, be a heroic innovator, test stuff, deploy it, iterate. And there have been some amazing results from that, you know, really rich storytelling formats that we never used to have before that jump off the page. Revenue models, hard paywall, membership, you know, ad supported. There have even been innovations in the way we think about our ethics and our trust model, being more transparent about where we're coming from, having a frame of fairness maybe rather than balance. So that whole discussion has been going on really for 2 decades at least, and it's produced a media landscape that really is still deeply, deeply broken. And part of that, I think, is because the future of news conversation, for all of you who've never heard of it, right, was a conversation that journalists had among themselves about their profession and about themselves, and really centered us. And so what do we have? We have like a very successful New York Times that can charge $50 a month or whatever it is for very rich reporting and Wordle. We have some, you know, digital startups that shot up like rockets, HuffPost, BuzzFeed, and then sort of died. 1 or 2 that have sustained, like Vox Media, and that remain really important. voices. But meanwhile, 2,500 local news outlets have shuttered. And if you look at the most optimistic assessments, or even, of the broad news landscape, and you count where is a news desert, a place, a county with no outlet, and where are there places where there are outlets, and what is the relationship of communities to their news providers and to their local politicians, you get an overly optimistic assessment, because a lot of what remains is crime and pink slime in newspapers that are owned by hedge funds, in local TV outlets that can really only afford to chase the police blotter. And what the people on this stage represent, I think, is an effort to bring some different tools to bear. And I want to get from that to what we do at the city. And so some of the tools that we end up using are from community organizing, from ethnography, listening, and from the Black and community press, which has always had a different approach to these issues than what the mainstream press has had. And so we have an opportunity now to think about our place in the civic conversation in a way that's not about, the heroic journalist as an innovator standing alone and fixing the problem, but a more collaborative, engaged, humble approach to the work that we do. And so, many of our organizations have been created in the way that Allison described in so much detail, by starting out with asking people what they need, what they want, how they feel about us. Oftentimes, how they feel is not that great. It's kind of rough. And oftentimes what they tell us is that we've done damage. And, it's very easy to actually see the damage. I would encourage everyone to do an experiment, is go into your Google search dialog and start typing in the name of a lower income community of color neighborhood in your city. And I promise you what you'll see happening is you'll get these auto prompts coming back from Google that are going to say, so for example, near to me, Brownsville, New York. If you start typing in Brownsville into the Google search bar, what will come back to you is, it gives you the little suggestions to make your search more efficient. It'll come back to you and say, is Brownsville sketchy? How dangerous is Brownsville? What's the crime rate in Brownsville? And all of those prompts are built on the training data that's been provided by local news organizations, that's been provided by our coverage of those communities over decades and decades. Huge libraries of kind of discrimination, essentially. So when we think about what the news needs to look like in a way that actually fosters and drives civic connection, supports rich civic engagement, supports democracy, and that is designed to support democracy, thinking about it in the ways that Allison has outlined and that we're going to hear more about from Morgan from the very beginning, requires us to incorporate that insight. So there's the stage of organization design, right? And certainly when the city launched in New York, relatively early in the burgeoning of this new movement, just 5 years ago, we looked around and a lot of people would have said, well, this is the media capital of the world. Certainly not a news desert, right? The New York Times has got a skyscraper on 38th Street. And the broadcast networks have, shiny towers on 6th Avenue. You're not needed. But what we are is not a news desert. We're kind of a news swamp with a really, really compromised ecosystem where coverage of local neighborhoods, really broken local electoral systems, hugely busted housing courts, political machines that are incredibly unresponsive and unaccountable, immense inequality has withered away. And even when it was there, what we heard from people was it did damage. And what is left is media that serves very well the very large number of enormously wealthy people in New York who are mostly concentrated in Manhattan below about 96th Street or 110th Street and Brownstone, Brooklyn, and ignores the rest of the city except to the extent that it illustrates something bad. And we believe that it's crucial to address that both for the civic health of the biggest city in the country and actually for the national conversation, because so many of the most damaging representations of what's happening in our big cities and in public policy generally focus on big cities and big city policy and the representation of who lives in big cities and what affects their lives. So I'm sorry for the long preamble, but I think it's important to put together this kind of civic context and the journalism conversation in a way that shows that we have to be more fundamentally responsive to both what people are asking us at the neighborhood level and what people are doing from a news perspective. So we tried to build the city that way and to build in community input in the design of the organization first, and then into the journalism choices that we make as we go along. And we do that at varying levels of complexity. The simplest thing we do is to hold meetings, usually at a public library branch, which are off-the-record community conversations. And we just ask people what they're thinking about and what's troubling them, what they need information about. And we hear some pretty consistent stuff there. The rent is too damn high. We can't figure out how to access assistance. What's a journalistic response to that? Building housing into a coverage area that is not real estate is one response to that. Creating service and explanatory journalism that makes sense of how to access it is another. But we also do specific projects that grow out of that kind of interaction. And if you want a clear impact, the most complex project we did, and I hate to harken back to COVID, but the most complex community project we did began during COVID, where we saw that obituaries were available mainly to people with money who could afford to place one in the Times, and pretty much everyone whose death was being represented was white and affluent, and most of the people who were dying were not white or affluent. So we created a project to give everyone an obituary and to collaborate with the community to write them, roped in journalism volunteers, journalism educators to build a memorial to everyone lost to COVID-19. And we worked with local theater groups to translate that into a play. But over time, and this is bringing it back to the present, that project created its own community and led to much deeper trust than you would expect among families who had been affected by COVID and who are still affected by COVID, which we're all trying so hard to pretend is over. And what we consistently heard in those conversations was that there were thousands and thousands of children who had been left without a caregiver. In fact, in New York City alone, 8,500 kids were left without a caregiver. So we worked with community groups working with those kids, listened to those kids, tried to understand what was happening with their needs, and essentially that family members were having to take them in, support them financially, and that ongoing burden persists to this day. And the result of actually publishing that number and identifying some of those issues was the creation of legislation to create special COVID bonds to provide financial support from the New York State Legislature to those families. It hasn't passed yet, but a very clear case of community input into what we should be covering, an issue that from a kind of traditional chasing clicks perspective wasn't going to garner much action, and is actually the result of the long tail of 3 years of coverage and 3 years of communication with those communities to produce a legislative outcome. There are lots of others, some of them, we can talk about them as we go.
But this one definitely created a bond between the medium and the community. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Morgan, why and how does the City Bureau equip people with skills and resources? And does this engagement in critical public conversation produce information that directly addresses people's needs?
Good morning, y'all. Good morning, good morning. Hi, everybody, I'm Morgan. As mentioned, I am the Executive Director of City Bureau. A little bit more context about City Bureau. We are a civic media lab, and we do things a little different. We're a little alternative, you know. For a long time, people would ask us, are you a newsroom? And the answer is we're a sustained impact newsroom. Our coverage doesn't look like everyone else's. We don't have a daily outlet. What we do have is guides. We give people the information they need, informed by what people ask us for and how we engage with community and what they tell us is important. So what we find that people need in the context of coverage and why our products are so interesting to them is that they need a how-to. How do I navigate systems? And it's not just the coverage, it's how do we wrap experience around coverage. So City Bureau operates in 3 program verticals. One program vertical is our documenters program. Our documenters program is when we pay public citizens, everyday citizens, to go to public meetings. We pay them to document what they hear, we train them, and then those notes are then transferred and translated into distribution through coverage, through our fellowships, through our partnerships. Sometimes we do special assignments with documenters that are not just taking notes, but are surveying or interviewing. We equip people with the skills of journalism so that they can move towards self-determination and self-advocacy. And so as we give people the skills of journalism, we train them, and then they're able to be a part of our editorial process in the context of our public newsroom forum, where we do civic education. So for public newsroom, journalists, everyday citizens, community organizations all come together, talk about issues, inform stories, do repeat backs, deconstruct topics. And that particular program has been adopted all over the world. We have groups as far as Brazil doing public newsrooms. And for our documenters work, you all may have heard of the Documenters Network. And I too have team members here. So Max is in the back if you guys want to start a documenter site. And Max runs our growth and innovation work for the Documenters Network. And so we are currently in 17 other communities outside of Chicago, wherever we have over 6,500 assignments that have been taken all over the country. We have nearly 700 legislative bodies all over the country currently being documented across these sites, and we have sites in every type of community. We opened our first Indigenous site this year in North Dakota in partnership with organizations there. We also have sites everywhere from Gary to Spokane, as well as Atlanta, Detroit, San Diego, Chicago, LA. So pretty disparate all over, every kind of community. And that has really informed through lines and trends for us through our platform documenters.org and the volume of information that's captured in that space. But finally, we have our editorial work, which is really where a lot of our coverage lives. And our editorial team is our small but mighty newsroom that just won a Pulitzer for local reporting a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Thank you. So we're really excited about that. And in their work, they run a civic reporting fellowship. So we have people that come to us that want to be journalists, but aren't going to go to journalism school. So we train them in the skills of journalism, help them get bylines so that they can then be hired by other locations and other publishers. And we have had a good track record of fellows going on to be reporters in newsrooms that never went to journalism school. And so we're really, really proud of the work that we do, our investigative coverage, and so much of what connects our work to community is being driven by citizen expertise and informed by community, but also even when we're not in Chicago, focusing on a multi-local approach and believing that we don't need to be City Bureau of New York. There are people in New York who know New York best. And so how do we partner with those folks and have affiliates through our Documenters Network and other programs that then further our work and deepen their work? How are we supportive to ecosystems in other places? What's our work? What's their work? And thinking critically about swim lanes. And so when we think about impact and how our work supports community, the Chicago Missing Persons Project is what recently won the Pulitzer for local reporting. It's a 7-piece series that you can read at chicagomissingpersons.com. And what makes this project so interesting is, it's a story that covers why Chicago police was mishandling missing persons cases in Chicago and how they were mishandling missing persons cases. We went through a ton of data. This was a 2-year investigation. Our lead reporter on this project was Sarah Conway, and we partnered with another newsroom called Invisible Institute, and Trina Reynolds was our partner there. And we ended up with this 7-piece series really illuminating that we had people saying that their loved one was missing, and the police would mark them as safe and at home, and 2 days later they'd be found dead. and they were never safe and at home. And you'd find that based on when they were murdered before they were marked safe and at home. And we found that in over 6 cases. We would find situations where people would say, oh, I've been calling the police for 3 weeks and no one can give me an update on my case. And there's an assumption that if you are a runaway and you are Black or brown, you are a runaway. Like, you're not missing, you're not kidnapped, you're not sex trafficked, you literally just left home. And so we kept finding was that over 70% of missing persons studied in this data set were Black women and girls. And we believe that there's a larger proportion of Latino women and girls, but for a number of reasons, they're not coming forward and or not being taken seriously or reported. So when we started doing that research, we were like, hey, this is a real issue. And we found a lot of families with survivors saying, no one will take my case. On the South Side, if you go and you report someone missing, nearly non-responsive, and the families are not allowed to be involved in the case. On the North Side, if someone goes missing, the family is intimately involved in the case. They get updates every day, and it's just taken a ton more care, frankly, when white people are missing versus when Black and brown people are missing. And so as we did this reporting, the data proved that unequivocally. And so part of this was, how do you treat sources with care? Responsible coverage isn't just what you put out, it's also how you engage with the people who are being the sources, respecting their boundaries, respecting their lived experience, and treating them with care as you're also amplifying their story. I think there's this boundary, it's an interesting space of in journalism, you can do a ton of research, you can do a ton of investigation, you can write a piece, and also you are amplifying the lived experiences of other people and who owns the story, the person who's writing the story or the person whose life informs the story. And so as we continued to think through the reporting in that space, we also wrapped engagement around it. So we have a engagement team, a community engagement team. So we did public newsrooms around missing persons. We have great relationships with local schools. We have great relationships with local aldermen. And so it wasn't just, okay, we're going to put out this coverage. We also did guides on how to keep yourself safe, what to do if someone goes missing, what to do to protect yourself, what are your rights? And so all of those guides came out with the 7-piece series. And then our engagement team and the reporters would partner on in-person experiences to give this information and meet people where they were so that they could actually use the information versus solely reporting on what's happening to them. What do we do so that this doesn't continue to happen? This story came out in November. By February, we were being alerted that the city of Chicago's Inspector General was going to prioritize overhauling how the Chicago Police Department looks for missing persons. And so this is a huge, huge deal for us. We're actually speaking at a public safety hearing in a couple of months to literally just cement that this is a working group that needs to happen at the city level and reinforce the Inspector General work. But we're hoping that we do see an overhaul in how missing persons cases are investigated in Chicago. The Illinois Justice Task Force also put out a report investing in this as well through the Illinois Police Department. So that was quick, y'all. That was only 6 months ago we put the story out, and we're already seeing at the state level and at the city level that there's going to be real potential policy and process change for how missing people are looked for. But what really was impactful, the policy is important, the process is important. It's the look on a survivor's face when they see that someone listened to their story, treated with them care, amplified it, and something happened. And care was core to that the entire time. It's the look that someone cared about your missing sister. I've been to a number of these events with our team in Chicago, and we have heard from a number of survivors and family members in real time, and they've been given the space to talk about what happened. And the just level of gratitude to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be affirmed, that's responsible coverage. And so City Bureau, we're always trying something. We're always trying something, whether it's a new way to cover something, a new program, a new project, a new way to engage residents. We're always looking for a new way to be as connected as possible. But that is our work, really thinking critically about how we can amplify, how we can equip, and how the work that we do lends to self-determination, liberation, and justice.
Hearing you really feels that although you're based in Chicago, you have a national impact. And the last story, which won the Pulitzer Prize, an example of how this collaboration can lead to impactful journalism and change policies.
Yeah, collaboration with residents and collaboration with other newsrooms. We didn't do this on our own. We don't have to do things on our own. And that's the future of news.
Martin, I would like you to give us a brief outline of your work in the Center for Public Deliberation, and tell us a few words on how you enhance local democracy through this work.
Yeah, and I'll actually start. Our local League of Women Voters chapter, League of Women Voters of Larimer County, working with Max, working with some state resources, have kind of started a little pilot program, have an observer corps that's doing kind of great work. My name is Martin Carcasson. I'm a communication studies professor at Colorado State University. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my research that led to me founding the Center for Public Deliberation, which I run at CSU. And then that leads kind of towards the end of the story to the focus of this summit, which is media and democracy. So I'll explicitly make the connections to journalism at the end, but I think a lot of y'all, especially journalists, will see inherently the connections as we kind of go through. My initial academic training going back 25 years ago was in the subfield of argumentation. So basically I was trained on how do you evaluate arguments? How do you make distinctions between strong arguments and weak arguments? And that's stuff like logic and fallacies and credibility. But I've also really always looked at the kind of power of stories, the power of emotions, and probably most of my work has focused on the power of values. Like how do we talk about values and how values can easily be used to divide us, and how values reframed in more productive ways can kind of work to kind of bring us together in some important ways. My basic belief, which I think probably all of us agree with, is democracy, particularly a diverse democracy, is hard. It requires high quality conversations. It requires us to talk across difference. And unfortunately, we're just not wired that way. A lot of my work is informed, particularly about the last 10 years, in social psychology and brain science and how we're wired. And the unfortunate reality is we're much more wired for outrage and anger than we are for collaboration and deliberation. Right? So the easiest way to kind of explain what I try to do in my work is I try to design processes that avoid triggering the worst of human nature and hopefully can tap into the best of human nature. And the best of human nature for me is we're actually really good creative problem solvers when put in a situation to tap into that. But we much more prefer kind of the simple stories and kind of good versus evil. We love our heroes and our victims and our villains. And once we decide who's playing what character, we see the world through that lens. And heroes do heroic things and villains do horrible things and victims get victimized. So a lot of my work is how do we kind of build off that and kind of change and elevate our conversations in important ways. So about 18 years ago, I started the Center for Public Deliberation. It serves as an impartial resource, primarily to the Northern Colorado community, to help us have the conversations we need to have for democracy to work and for us to take on our shared problems. So in my classes, every semester, I teach a class that trains students as facilitators. And then we design and we run and report on innovative events in the community. It's actually progressed now about the last 8 years. We now charge, so we get hired by the city, by the county, by school districts, by community organizations to design and run these meetings. We've run over 500 meetings in the last 18 years. And again, it's all kind of based on bringing people together. So 100 people will show up to a meeting instead of 100 people listening to a panel of experts or 100 people walking up to that microphone one at a time and talking past each other. We can put those 100 people into 15 different tables and have my students at every table, trained generally in deliberation and conflict management, trained specifically on that topic to help spark a much better conversation. And again, not trigger the worst of human nature, actually kind of tap into the best of human nature. So from that experience of 18 years of running meetings and working with cities and municipalities kind of across the country and building this kind of capacity, I've really kind of seen two big problems, and we've already been talking about these. The first is kind of the polarization, and the second is what Claire Wardle has kind of framed this as information disorder, which I like that term now. So polarization, I have this odd kind of these two strong beliefs about polarization that I know in some ways don't fit together. First is I truly believe polarization is our number one issue. Because if we're not able to figure that out, because polarization triggers the worst of human nature, it undermines our ability to be able to take on any kind of issue and have any kind of conversation that we need to have. So if we don't take on polarization first, right, the good news is that we do take on polarization, it's going to have positive impacts on all kinds of issues, right? But my second belief is that our polarization is greatly exaggerated and often kind of falsely manufactured. There's a lot of people that benefit from the polarization, right? I explain my work as trying to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and tap into the best. There's a lot of people, and they get a lot more money than I do, doing the exact opposite, that understand the social psychology and are kind of feeding us these simple narratives, because that's what wins elections, that what brings eyeballs, and that what increases their salary. So how do we kind of work against that? With information disorder, for me, I see this as a combination of kind of information overload and the misinformation, disinformation, malinformation that we've heard about a lot. The basic reality, and I think the next panel is on AI, which has even kind of exploded this even more. Our ability to create information and share information has just exponentially kind of exploded. Our ability to make sense of that information, our ability to turn data into knowledge, into insight, and hopefully into to wisdom has not kept up whatsoever. And that, unfortunately, goes back to the first problem and makes it easy to kind of polarize people. So from dealing with these two problems for 18 years, the biggest insight I have, particularly for local communities, is they need capacity. They need bridging organizations. They need mediating institutions. We need conveners. We need skilled facilitators. We need leaders in organizations that are dedicated to helping people have the conversations they need to have, that are focused on elevating the conversation, not just trying to win the argument. And the more the merrier. So I work a lot with public libraries, with League of Women Voters, with community foundations. How do we tap into more of these civic organizations? How do we reinvigorate kind of old bridging organizations and create new ones? And you're starting to see now how I'm starting to connect with journalism kind of in this role in important ways. All right. So that does kind of bring us to journalism about fall of 2002, so almost 3 years ago, I helped launch a new project called the Northern Colorado Deliberative Journalism Project. So that's a collaboration between the Center for Public Deliberation, our journalism department at CSU, and then local newsrooms, including the Fort Collins Coloradan, which is a Gannett paper, KUNC, which is one of our radio stations, the League of Women Voters is part of it, the public library is a part of it, the honors, the political science department. So this collaboration all kind of focused on how do we kind of experiment and innovate and figure out how to infuse our local journalism with more of these deliberative concepts, the things that we've learned from running 500 meetings. Now, completely recognize journalism has always had kind of a deliberative kind of connection to it, right? Journalism and democracy has always overlapped, but we're really focused on building that part of expanding the toolkit, of infusing local journalism with insights from conflict management, insights from argumentation, insights from social psychology and brain science, and how do they fill that need. And an important point here is, I'm not a journalist, right? I'm coming to journalism because I'm focused on how do we help communities? What do communities need to function well? And I'm finding journalism as something that can kind of fill that critical need. At the same time, where journalism is struggling, right? The financial model has, so I've written kind of an article about this dual crisis of both local journalism and local democracy, and how might there be some really interesting synergy when we bring those kind of two worlds together. So that work kind of locally in Northern Colorado has now expanded. Colorado is a hotbed for journalism and innovation. So I connect with organizations called Colorado Media Project, the Colorado News Collaborative or CoLab, the Colorado Press Association, and Rocky Mountain Public Media. Just starting a project called Above the Noise, which is working with a cohort of over 40 newsrooms across the state to help them kind of build the capacity with this, for them to kind of reimagine kind of the local civic square, and how do we kind of give them the resources to kind of play this role, right? So I'll end kind of with this notion that I truly believe local journalism is going to have to primarily switch to kind of this public good model. I don't think it's going to survive as a market kind of model and the way things work. So I believe kind of playing more of this deliberative role, playing this role as convener, as facilitator, as an honest broker of information, which is a huge good that the public needs, will really help facilitate this shift. And as communities kind of realize we need organizations that help bring us together, and journalism can really fill that need in some important ways.
taking part in discussions regarding the collaboration between media and the communities, there is always a point where that really troubles me. Where where is the line between reporting on community issues and becoming a participant in the issue? And especially how, as a journalist, how do journalists maintain objectivity while engaging with the community in deeply issues? And what happens when they're part of this community? How can they maintain their objectivity?
I'll start with this. Frankly, I think this is the question we're all grappling with, and we've all been debating this backstage today and for the last 2 days. I don't actually believe journalism can be objective. I don't think that, I went to Chapel Hill for journalism school, very old school journalism. Objectivity was pummeled into us. I never bought it. We all have life experience that we bring to the table, right? I think that we have to be transparent about what we bring to the table and thoughtful and seek out other perspectives in our reporting. And I don't think that I think that was a Marty Barron article that called out that we don't expect we expect our judges to be objective and fair and to apply the law fairly, but we don't expect them to not be human, and we don't expect them to not have their own lived experiences and their own opinions. And I think we can try to apply that same sort of thinking to journalists too. I don't think journalists can be fully objective. I think we can be fair and we can seek out other perspectives. And I think it's also important for us to be part of our communities and to care about the people and the issues that we're covering and to take those things into consideration. I also think that we sometimes have a narrow definition of journalism. I think there is a place for advocacy journalism in the world. I think that there is a place for journalism that leans left and journalism that leans right. I think where we are lacking right now as a community is journalism that attempts to provide some balanced perspective. There's a lot of, to Martine's point about polarization, there's a lot more support out there for journalism that leans one direction or the other. There's a lot more money in journalism that leans way left or way right. The middle is not sexy. The middle does not get clicks. The middle does not sell well. That's harder to do, which would bring us to the sustainability issue. Just as a case in point, our organization is largely right now philanthropically funded, and I had a phone call yesterday with a funder who has been a long-time funder and very pointedly asked me what Spotlight Delaware, we covered Delaware, and we are a news organization attempting to provide fair and balanced community information. What was Spotlight Delaware going to do to advocate for the Palestinians? And where was our public statement on Gaza? And they weren't sure that they could give us funding if we were not going to take a very public position on Gaza. And that's a really tough place to be. What I ended up doing was kind of holding the line and saying, that's not what our organization does. But we may very well lose that grant because we are not trying to take an advocacy position, which puts us in a more challenging place sustainability-wise, right? I have to find the funders and the supporters who believe in the middle and who believe in discourse, who believe that it's important to have conversation, nuanced conversation. So, it's tough. This is something that we talk about in our newsroom every day. When we choose the stories that we cover, part of David's job is to help us say, hey, does that word choice make us sound too liberal? Does that word choice or that phrasing make us sound too conservative? How do we build trust among our readership and among our audience by presenting information in fair ways without veering into advocacy and still acknowledging that we're human beings with our own opinions and experiences?
I mean, yeah, I think you said something important. We are part of these
Just one.
communities. Like many, but one of our biggest community engaged projects was around 911 calls in New York City schools. So I have kids in New York City schools. You know, half of my colleagues have kids in New York City schools. We'd done a long-running investigative project on youth and adolescent mental health in New York State and New York City. And some of the conversations that started to come out of that reporting were around what happens when young kids are in extreme psychiatric crisis in their schools. And what we learned from talking to advocates, social workers, teachers, kids, collaborator news organizations that specialize in education like Chalkbeat was that over and over again, when kids as young as 5, 6, 7 years old are in extreme mental health crisis, teachers and administrators have recourse to calling 911. And those kids end up in handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser instead of in the care of a mental health worker. That's not supposed to happen. It happens hundreds of times a year. You won't be surprised that it happens most in lower income neighborhoods, communities of color. It happens to Black boys most of all. And there's very little aggregate data on this issue. So we did some very fancy data journalism to combine Department of Education data, police data, to look at what resources are available in every school, what is the ratio of guidance counselors and social workers to students. We convened some community conversations around this issue. We created service journalism to point people at resources that were available to them. Did we do that because we thought, here's a thing that's happening and we're going to cover it? And did we do it in that way because we thought it would burnish our investigative reporting chops? No, we did it in that way because we live in this city. We have kids in these schools. Our neighbors have kids in these schools. But what journalism, the combination of journalism tools and thinking, and some of the approaches that Martine outlined and Morgan outlined enable us to do is combine the power of journalistic fact-finding and new approaches to collaboration with our communities and public conversation to produce outcomes, journalistic outcomes that are grounded in the facts, but that are, of course, motivated by a desire to see the policy conversation move. And we hand it off at that point, right? And then we cover the policy conversation. But we want it to move. And so starting out from that perspective that we want our communities to be more equitable, we want to convene people around a common world of facts so that the policy conversation can move sensibly. We have an amazingly rich set of resources to do that if we are able to combine some of these toolkits and not remain very limited by Chapel Hill,
Which has progressed,
which has progressed enormously since. But we all know what battle they had very recently, actually, about those very standards at UNC Chapel Hill. So if we're willing to step out of those, but still ground ourselves in what our position in the civic conversation is, I think we can answer that question and turn it into a really strong positive, less than a threat.
I feel really compelled to interrogate the words truth and fact, but I know we only have so much time. I think it's really, really important to think about the fact that a grounding thing that comes to mind for me all the time in just a history of organizing is that it takes 13 touch points, contact with information, relationships, et cetera, to move someone to a different position. So you're walking down the street, you hear something on the radio, you hear something blasting out of someone's car, you see something on TV, you see the news. The amount of times that we repeat something, regardless of whether it's left, right, or middle, is that repetition and consistency not advocacy? Are we not organizing? I think it's really interesting to me that there's these missing pieces around just like media as a machine, media as an ecosystem that's constantly like depending on what you listen to, who you surround yourself with, what relationships you have, and how you gather information, continues to put newsrooms in a space of advocacy, whether they would call themselves that or not, because you're contributing to the repetition and the consistency of the message, whatever that message is. And so I'm not sure that there's going to be true and absolute objectivity, because humans are fallible and you can't legislate behavioral psychology. You can't legislate bias. You can't legislate lived experience, relationship, or trust. And if you want to have trusted bonds and trusted relationship in community where people even want the information you're giving at all, can you be wholly neutral because you're not actually responding to an information need? By way of having to respond in relationship to an information need, you are choosing a side, even if that side is people. Even if that side is citizens versus institutions or systems or wealthy people or this or that, you are choosing. And that does come with very specific leans on issues. And so even if you survey 100 people that are totally different types of stakeholders in an ecosystem impacting an issue, the bias and the objectivity comes in at the editorial decision. It's the editorial strategy. And people don't actually want that, is a part of what comes up for me. Is Tim will remember this, but there was a lot of talk a long time ago, and I don't know if people still do these, but the National Issues Forums was doing a lot of guides, getting people to consensus, where you would give people a topic and give them 3 options and 10 actions within those options, and there you had to weigh the trade-offs and get people to come to consensus on the topic. People would get bothered by that because it's really hard to legislate human behavior and what you're bringing to the conversation. And so being too objective felt disingenuous to people, because what they were looking for was someone to say, your issue matters. This issue matters in the way that it impacts you. And everyone's bringing that to the table. So I think there's a level of benefit to objectivity when it comes to editorial independence and how much impact money has on the things that you do. There's a benefit in objectivity when someone is trying to use media as a lever for propaganda. But when it becomes about relationship, reach, audience, as a means of getting trusted information to people that they can use to benefit their quality of life, which is our end goal, you do have to pick the side of citizens and the information that they need and ensuring that that's what you're reporting on. And so sometimes that may be more conservative, sometimes it may be more liberal. I don't think we have to live in this dichotomy of polarization, but so much of it is media saying we're polarized, so we're more polarized because we keep telling people we're polarized. And so I think being really critical about how you build impact ecosystems that inform your work help to lean into some of that objectivity. It's like how diversity can mean 1,000 different things. I think there's a lot of ways that you can be objective, and then amplify a variety of perspectives within that objectivity while still getting to an outcome that enriches lives and enhances lives.
Kind of a danger zone. This is something I've thought and done a lot of work on, and I don't want to get into professor mode because I normally talk an hour at a time. But when I introduced the Center for Public Deliberation, I said something like it serves as an impartial resource for Northern Colorado, and I chose the word impartial. Journalists kind of tend to use objective. I work a lot with public libraries; they tend to use neutral. I work a lot with city managers and public administration; they've always been seen as apolitical. So we have all these kind of fields that some kind of call to their ethic is to not be partisan in some ways. And from my work on social psychology and brain science, our communities need that. Right? We need people that are focused on bringing us together in kind of more productive ways. But I also recognize, how the heck, does impartiality or objectivity work in a hyper-partisan kind of environment? So I actually wrote an article for National Civic Review a couple years ago about that, of defending kind of impartiality. I use the concept of principled impartiality, which is kind of purposely an oxymoron, right? But part of that, and we heard that here, is I'm going to be impartial on the issue I'm running, right? For whatever issue I'm running for the city or so forth. but I'm actually partisan to democracy, small d democracy, which brings in some important values, right? What voices are heard and issues of power. When we train our facilitators, right, we train them if someone with power is shutting someone else down, like, no, they're going to intervene to kind of open up space. They're going to do some work. So I have this triangle. The top is impartiality. I have to be seen as impartial for me to do my work. People have to trust me. They have to believe I don't have a dog in the fight, right? But I have a commitment to democracy. I also have a commitment to good information, right? If one side has really good information and the other side has BS talking points, I don't want to be neutral there either, right? Again, my work in argumentation is to try to make distinctions between strong arguments and weak arguments. That's not easy, right? But that's part of the work that I have to do. We need good information and we need to kind of engage those tensions. The problem is those three commitments, impartiality, being biased towards good information, and biased towards democracy, don't fit together very well. There's some tough tensions. So my work is this constant process of trying to find the right balance and making sure none of those three dominate too much. Right. So I do see sometimes, I think some journalists or some, people that are impartial overemphasize neutrality, right, in a way that, can fall into a both sidesism or a false equivalency, and that's kind of dangerous, right? So how do we kind of think through that a little differently? The other quick thing I'll say also is, I know obviously from the social psychology and brain science, you can't be purely impartial, but I see my impartiality, that's my professional role, right? And it's also, for me, very pragmatic. There's certain issues that when I go in, as I look at the evidence, if I consider the arguments, I consider the values on different sides, I personally feel, this side has a much better argument than the other. But part of my job is creating a process that comes out naturally, right? So I truly believe that if we have really good conversations, the side that has better information and better arguments is going to win. So I can be purely focused on being impartial, with the knowledge that, hopefully pragmatically in the long term, that's going to be the best way for us to kind of move forward on some of these issues.
I think that's exactly right. That it's really about, as journalists, we have to apply our objectivity or our balance or impartiality, whatever it is. That is our professional role. We can never completely remove our humanity from that and our own lived experiences. It's our job, though. Of course, I have my own political leanings and opinions and lived experiences that affect myself and how I think. But when Jake and I are looking at a story together, or when we're talking about how we're going to cover the upcoming election, it's my job to facilitate the community having access to lots of good quality information that they can consider, that they can participate effectively and fully. If I remove my professional hat and apply my personal beliefs and interests to that exclusively, that's no longer, that veers into advocacy journalism. And I think that's sort of a differentiator we have to apply.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You have your own opinion, but for what I say to myself is always stay on the facts. If you stay on the facts, then you are impartial. No,
the challenge is, what's his facts, right? Some journalists will say, well, facts are facts. Facts aren't always just facts, right? We thought we had facts about the vaccine. A lot of us who really believed and pushed that what was said about the vaccine initially was 100% fact, right? There were people on both extremes who had very strong opinions about those things and claimed these are the facts, this is the science. But facts evolve, science evolves, information evolves, and we learn things, and we have to be able to then say, we thought this was a fact, and now that information has changed.
Yeah, probably we have to dig deeper in the rabbit holes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Martin, you mentioned the issue of trust. There is a global discussion about the loss of trust in journalism, the loss of trust in journalists themselves, and we have this new phenomenon of news avoidance. Do you believe, I want to start with you as a professor, do you believe that this cooperation, this partnership between journalists, local media, and the communities are a way to regain, for journalism and journalists to regain their trust on the public?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and we certainly do see polls. I think Pew Research just released something not too long ago about local news. There is a lot more trust in local news, right? And a lot of the anti-media is often kind of seen kind of mainstream media, kind of the national thing. So you have that, but that still could certainly be strengthened a lot more, right? So one of the things that we do, we have this monthly meeting that we do at the public library on different topics, kind of engaging. But one of the things we always do is kind of a meet your local journalist, right? Because we want these people to realize, like, in your local community, your journalists, they live in your community. They're real, they're there in a real, and that kind of increases that trust. And I certainly kind of believe doing the work that we're working on with this kind of deliberative journalism, it should help with that as well, right? Because you're kind of seeing their goal, they're clearly focused on helping elevate the conversation and help people engage these issues, which gives them a different model to think about the role of the journalist. Right?
I mean, we're all, the three of us are involved in young institutions, right? And we are still building our capital of trust as institutions in the places where we operate. And I think that's a long and complex process. And part of it is related to the discussion we just had about whether you can test our facts. Part of it is related to how we show up. Something that we are trying to do at the city is to ensure that we pair our pretty hard-edged accountability reporting with service reporting for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons is related to trust, and that is that when we do service reporting, you can really test us. So to take a simple example, if we tell you you can enter your address into a tool that we've built, and it'll tell you where you need to go vote and who your candidates are, you will see if that is accurate or not. If we tell you these are the tools you can use if your landlord won't turn the heat on to an adequate level in the winter, and you go and use those tools, firstly maybe with your landlord, then maybe with the city, and you get a result, then you can pretty maybe trust the next bit of reporting we do that may be more uncomfortable. And, I don't think there's a simple product fix or a simple strategy fix to rebuilding trust. I think these are approaches we can take, but we are actually trying to build new institutions or to rebuild existing institutions and to plug them into a deliberative civic framework and into a community framework where there is a kind of mesh of institutions and a resilient information environment. And that's not a kind of solve. It's a multi-year, multi-decade, really delicate social process that we form part of. And taking it on openly and discussing how we do it as we are here, I think is one of the really rich possibilities that we have right now. Beyond just like, can we do cooler data journalism, or how much should we charge for subscriptions? And it does feed sustainability as well. We see our readers who are prepared to contribute to us tell us over and over again that they do so because they can see the relationship between quality information and change and improvement in their conditions.
Yeah, I think to the point of trust, I always say that, like, we have public education, we have all of these public systems, and then we have nonprofits that are like, okay, this system doesn't do a thing, so now we need to do youth development, now we need to do food pantries, now we need to do all these things. News isn't there yet. We have nonprofit news because it's a different type of business model. But like, there's this larger thing around people don't trust news. News is like not the thing people currently feel like they need this huge solve for. Like, there's not tons of nonprofits in every community that are just news literacy. There's not tons of nonprofits in all of these places trying to solve for broken news, as much as it is more nonprofit newsrooms popping up, being local news and trying different approaches. And so the models may look different, but news and media are still wholly intact as a system in a lot of ways, in ways that other systems are not. And everyone's trying to solve for fixes for things that they just won't deliver, can't deliver, don't deliver. I think there's the future. I mean, just to plant like a firm stake in it, the future of news is trust. Like, period. If we're going to sustain this industry and we're going to sustain this system, people have to trust the information we put out, full stop. They have to feel like the information we're putting out speaks to their values, speaks to their information needs. And there are also a lot of truth to the fact that you can't build trust if you don't actually know what information people need. And we think we know what information people need, and we don't always, and we don't often. And so, like, how are we listening to community in like a thoughtful way, but also bringing in support? Because sometimes we don't even know the appropriate questions to ask to get to the root of the types of information people need. It's easy to pull together a session and say to people, hey, what do you care about? Tell me the topics, tell me the things. That doesn't get to the heart of the type of information people need, the type of information people need to have quality of life, the type of information people need to do something about a thing. Like, there's a real urgent need for information needs mapping. We do a lot of work around like what is an opportunity that's available to you, what local news systems are available to you, what topics are covered. There's not always as much listening work around style, around language, around naming and framing, and around the things that make the approach to people being able to hear the information you're even giving solid and sound. So as we think about what trust looks like, it's got to look like starting with information needs, and then really being responsive and structurally embedded in that relationship. It's why I said, like, objectivity and impartiality, to a degree, we choose the side of the public. We choose the side of the needs that the public has. We choose the side of being responsive to that. And like, that is a side, because that doesn't always mean monolithic and congruent interests with other systems and institutions. So I think ultimately trusted bonds and trusted relationships are what's going to create sustainability and resiliency. And so to your point, I do think City Bureau is a good case study of this. You do have to create other roles for newsrooms. What does it mean to be a convener? What does it mean to create experiences? What does it mean to build impact ecosystems? What does it mean to be in collaboration with other newsrooms? We do that, and we do it really well. And people are picking up on that and also doing it. It's an emergent model that 5 years ago, if you had asked someone about citizen journalism and a lot of the things City Bureau was doing, they'd have told you, I don't think that's going to work. Now we have documenters demand in over 100 cities. Like, it does work. Part of the importance of the Documenters program and the Documenters network is that information and news are being documented by everyday citizens and then being turned into coverage that turns into impact. And so you can trust your neighbor, you trust your family member, you trust your colleague at work. Those are the people doing the documentation. So like, there are new roles for how people even show up in news ecosystems to broaden civic participation, advance democracy, but also make news more trusted because I know where it comes from. And it's not someone trying to sell me something or convince me of something. It's literally just my neighbor who cares as much about information at the high level as I do.
You talked about sustainability and viability. What is the role that communities play in promoting this sustainability and viability of a local media?
So this is obviously the super hard thing. The super hard thing. The public good frame, I think, is absolutely the one that all of us are grounding our work in. And how around the world have we addressed the market failure to deliver public goods? I mean, there are places where public broadcasting and other policy interventions have provided the support for that. And, you know, they are governed to varying degrees of effectiveness and allowed varying degrees of independence. There is a really burgeoning conversation about what kinds of policy interventions are needed right now to rebuild local news in this country. Should there be tax credits, for example, a very popular way of just talking about subsidies in a way that's politically palatable in the US? is using tax credits. Now, there's a community element to that, right? Do communities support public policies that will result in a healthy news environment? We are pretty darn terrible at advocating for well-designed public policy supports for the work that we do and the role we play in delivering public goods. That's starting to change. There's a great organization called Rebuild Local News that leads a lot of this work and that has just won a tax credit in Illinois, payroll tax credit, yay, Illinois, of $15,000 for each journalist currently on the payroll, $25,000 for the addition of new journalists. We have a less well-designed process underway in New York City right now. So I think, firstly, I don't want to forget, especially in a room that has a bunch of political scientists in it, a discussion about public policy intervention and the role that we all should be playing in discussing with our communities the need for public policy supports. On the other end of the spectrum, and with large resources, philanthropy is particularly in a US context, plays a huge role. And philanthropies are to varying degrees engaged with and invested in community outcomes. And certainly some of the impetus behind the founding of the city was philanthropists who looked around and said, I've been investing in housing and homelessness programs for 40 years, and I've never seen coverage so bad and so limited on these issues that I'm investing in. And there is no traction because there is no coverage. And so we need to invest in local news. And so the level of philanthropic support that's available is massively underscale relative to the size of the problem. And we need to see much more of a response on that side. It's starting to happen, and there are philanthropies that, the whole reason that we're here, right, is that there are philanthropies that get it. And that are starting to mobilize support behind local news. And there's a national initiative called Press Forward, which aims to catalyze local philanthropy behind news of this kind. Then there is the question of reader support. And at the city, for example, we get about 12 or 13% of our revenues from reader contributions. And that's people that are giving $10 a month, $5 a month, sometimes as much as $85 or $100 a month. To support our work on a voluntary basis. That's incredibly powerful for us. It also has some risks because the people who give us money mainly live in Park Slope and on the Upper West Side. And there is a danger that we trim our coverage to suit their preferences. And those are not underserved neighborhoods. They're highly politically engaged neighborhoods. But if we shape all of our coverage to ensure that we get bigger membership contributions, there's a significant chance, and I think this is a problem that a lot of public radio stations face, there's a significant chance that we'll neglect whole swathes of our cities or our counties. So we need to design a pretty all of the above strategy that involves public policy, philanthropy, reader support, and some earned revenue from advertising and corporate sponsorship. Businesses are part of communities too. So trying to capture a share of local advertising that can maybe be enough to pay for one journalist or two or three, but not expecting it to support the whole enterprise is what we need to do. But it's really, really hard. It's really, really fragile. And we are kind of coming from a standing start right now. Places are starting to build reserves, are starting to accelerate their fundraising momentum, but we have a massively long way to go.
I think it's important to acknowledge that we need diverse funding streams to support our organizations, because as journalists, we can't afford to be too dependent on any single source. And this is not new. This is the same as it was in the heydays, right? If the News Journal were overly dependent on advertising revenue from ShopRite, they couldn't afford to be critical of ShopRite, right? Because they would potentially lose that advertising, and if they depended on it too much, it would put them at too much risk. We right now have a significant a significant grant from the Longwood Foundation, which in Delaware, some of you know, is part of the DuPont family legacy. We still need to be able to cover the DuPont family. We need to be able to cover, if something happened, we would need to be able to cover the Longwood Foundation without fear of going under if we lost that funding. It's the same kind of thing. So we need to be strong enough and have diverse enough revenue streams so that if we cover somebody so much that we piss them off and they yank their funding, we can survive for another day. And that's exactly the same as it has been for decades in the news business. I do agree that we're a little bit allergic in the United States, I think, to the idea of public money being part of that revenue mix, but I think we're starting to move from that. So I think that is becoming more and more of a possibility, and that there are ways to do that and build healthy firewalls. I think that we also need to be cautious when we're thinking about philanthropic support, because before I started this work, I spent the previous 12 years with the Delaware Community Foundation. So on the funder side, spending time with funders, philanthropists are fickle. We really like that shiny new project. And it doesn't matter if it's a new newsroom or a new homeless shelter or a new puppy, whatever it is, we're excited about funding that new thing. But funders don't want to do sustained funding. Not very many of them. I don't mean to paint too broad of a brush, but most funders, when we go into them, the first thing they'll say is, before we make a grant, what's your sustainability plan? This is a 3-year grant. You're not coming back to me for year 4, right? You're going to have your own plan by then. Right now, I just say, yes, that's right. We will come up with a plan. But yeah, so philanthropy is not necessarily a long-term permanent answer, and it's certainly not, there's not enough philanthropy out there to cover all of the communities that need and deserve coverage. So even Press Forward with its $1 billion, I think they did the math and it figured out they could do something like $167 per county in the United States, which, it certainly doesn't clear anybody's check or pay their health insurance. So we have work to do on this, and I think it's going to continue to be the revenue model is going to continue to evolve.
I may be the outlier, but I'm not necessarily. I'm a believer that there are a lot of market solutions for the future of news. But I think a large part of that is because other sectors have figured out funding vertical integration for their sectors, but journalism hasn't. We fund the coverage, we don't fund the other things. So take, for example, the medical field. Has anyone been to a hospital lately? Around every hospital is medical housing. There's so many other offshoot businesses for just medical stuff. News owns none of that. We don't own billboards. We don't own the print shops. We don't own housing for journalists, but we keep saying that we want more women and diverse people to be in journalism, but they can't afford it based on journalist salary, but we don't own any housing. A lot of other areas, whether it's real estate, whether it's medicine, there are artist lofts, there are not for journalists. All of the other things, owning the distribution, owning all of these other pieces, we don't own. And so I think there is a lot of value to the types of products that are going to be created, can be created, that are enabling to continue to move the work forward, to advance reach, to create sustainability in the market. We just haven't tapped that potential yet. But I do think that there's a variety of products and a variety of assets and a variety of businesses that are all going to be critical to our ability to do news at all, that we just haven't figured out owning yet and delivering on yet as a means of vertical integration and efficiencies in the way that we do our work. So I think that we aren't going to have a choice but to do that in the next 10 years. There is a lot to be said about public funding. I'm not necessarily a believer that it's going to come in the way that people think it's going to come over other priorities. I don't think it is. And so I'm not banking on whether or not public funding is going to come. we are going to be receiving public funding. We took on ARPA dollars for Cook County, but it wasn't for journalism. It was for broadband and digital equity, because you need to have digital equity in order for people to have access to the information you're putting out there in the first place. And so I think it's really like this networked approach of what are all of the things, and really thinking a lot about that. I don't think, no matter how November goes, if someone has to choose about other major issues and whether or not to fund journalism at large, they're not going to choose journalism at more than like a $10 million pace. And so we just really need to think a lot about, if $1 billion nationwide from Press Forward is not going to be enough, $10 million a state for newsrooms at a $250,000 cap per newsroom is not going to be enough. So like, we are going to have to participate in the market, and not just around ad revenue. We just need time to get creative about what is that going to be.
I agree with you, Morgan. I think part of it is we need to break some of our old mindsets, because I think as journalists, we were trained in journalism school. There is no business class. You take AP style, you take, you learn to write in the Wall Street, all this stuff. You never learn about the business of it, and you are told that you're not allowed to think about the stuff on the other side of the wall. And we need to break those silos down and start thinking creatively. And I think that's what all of us are trying to do. Morgan's working on some different verticals. We're working on some different marketing solutions to help support create revenue streams for our work, our independent journalism. I think this is just what we have to do, is we have to shake off some of those old school fears and that over marriage, this idealism of full objectivity, and that you should be able to do it without having to get anywhere near dirty money. That, because it's a business. Even a nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business model. And we have to find a way to make sure our folks get fed and well cared for and have the capacity to serve the community too.
Quite frankly, the most sustainable nonprofits I know are the ones that are vertically integrated. A good example of this is in Chicago, there's a Safe Haven. A Safe Haven serves veterans. They do multifamily housing for veterans. They also have grants from the state to do veteran services, wraparound services for mental health and housing, food, jobs, workforce development, all the things. Then they also have sub-businesses that they run around hiring veterans for catering businesses. They have government contracts with the city to have the veterans that are living in the housing also be the people doing the planters in the middle of the streets. Like, we have to do more of that, because those are the ones who are 60 years old and have not had less than a $20 million a year budget for quite a long time and aren't worried about deficits, aren't worrying about political climates and whether that's going to take their money from them during the different recessions. Like, being recession proof is going to be a really big deal. Preparing for all of these things is going to be a really big deal. And it's not going to come if we don't get in the market.
So it was a 90-minute session, and I wish we had more, 90 minutes more. It was really exciting, and I want to thank you all very much for being here with us, and thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.